All right, folks, this is Bob Coppage, CEO Simplex-IT, crotchety old geek, and welcome to another episode of Biz Tech Twists, where we talk about business and technology, but we try to look at it from a slightly different perspective because I just don't have the attention span to do anything else beyond that. And here's the challenge that I had is I wanted to talk about AI because it's the only way you get invited to cool parties. I still am waiting for my invitation. Um, but I don't want to talk about AI just the way everybody else is talking about it. And I happened to meet Brad Reynolds over at Expedient, and he was one of a group that was talking about artificial intelligence for the Cleveland chapter of the Private Directors Association. And you and I got to talking about afterwards. And then I got that, blackmailing piece I was able to use against you in order to invite you to come here and join me on this. So, Brad, tell me a little bit about yourself and Expedient, because I really wasn't paying attention when we met.
Yeah, that's okay. So I actually met Bob at a different PDA event where he was on a panel talking about some cybersecurity issues relative to ransomware and all of that. So I found him to be, or found you to be an extremely engaging presenter in terms of being able to kind of emotionally and sometimes comedically connect with the audience. And so I was like, I got to keep that guy top of mind. So when I saw you at the AI event, it was like, oh, I got to see what Bob's up to and how this kind of goes. But me personally, lifelong Clevelander. I've started and sold a bunch of technology companies, I'm the founder, CEO, software, infrastructure, all kinds of stuff. But I the current journey. So my career, I kind of say is like half over. I'm halfway through. First half of the career was about like the internet. And the internet was like, how do we get it connected to people and how do we host servers and how do we get all these applications kind of out there? Second half of the career is AI. And I don't know exactly where AI is going. I just know I have to be deep involved in it. And so for the last couple of years, I've been doing AI consulting. So helping companies essentially get private AI inside so that they could use it responsibly. And then I ended up reconnecting with a company that I used to own and I started called Expedient, um, and said, hey, can we take AI and figure out how to make it part of our cloud service infrastructure business model? So I came back on board with Expedient after a long sojourn of doing a bunch of startups to be their SVP of AI. And if you rewind the kind of movie reel, I mean, who would have thought there's titles like SVP of AI reporting to a CEO at like a large corporation? It's coming. We just happen to be a little bit ahead of it. So inside of this company, we look at, hey, we're a data center cloud provider. How do we make it super easy for our clients to start connecting to AI infrastructure and kind of implementing it in an enterprise appropriate fashion versus just, hey, have everybody use ChatGPT type thing. So that's what I'm up to. But the field's kind of changing so rapidly that there's sets of job which is marketing, sales. There's sets of job that's product development, but a lot of it's just reading. So like every day you get a bunch of newsletters, and I'm trying to keep abreast of who's pushing the envelope in what way and what lawsuit is happening and what bias and guardrails. It's like whole variety of topics that are relevant to AI. And it's like, I feel like half of my job is just kind of reading the newspaper every day and staying on top of it. So that's what I'm up to, kind of building out infrastructure, knee deep in lots of conversations on lots of different topics. But the kind of one notion back is that the vast majority of folks in terms of AI are, in the baseball analogy, very much like top of the first hitter, in the batter's box. So just figuring out how do we get my arms around this thing? Where do I take the first step? And this is whether it's corporate or personal and all that type of stuff. And so a lot of conversations at that level. And so if anybody out there is feeling overwhelmed or they don't know where to start, yeah, let's everybody. So you're good.
Yeah, I was almost going to say, if you're not feeling overwhelmed, then you're not engaged in the topic.
Yeah, you got it, man.
to a certain degree. But it's interesting that you talk about how you were so focused on the internet and then now you're focused on AI. Because one of the things that I find interesting from the overall what we traditionally call the IT, and I've said it before that when IT started, it was capital T, small case I. It was all about the technology. The information was in. Now we're to the point where it's capital I, small case T. We're not really doing, I mean, we're certainly making new changes, and quantum computing will be the next one that's a huge one. Uh, but the last three big IT changes, which would be your big data, your cybersecurity, and AI, are all much more driven by the information and much less by the technology. And the interesting thing, though, is that AI, usually it's the geeks who bring this stuff forward and then everybody else catches up. That was the way with big data. That was the way with cybersecurity. That was not the way with AI. AI jumped the geek fence
Hmm.
and went straight to the end users, which I've never seen a technology, the evolutionary technology or revolutionary technology in our field, the IT field. I've never seen one that jumped the geek fence before. This is the first.
Yeah, and you can make the analogy this way. It's like I've always both of us have been involved in relatively geeky stuff over time.
Yeah.
And those are the businesses that we've built. And if I would go to a cocktail party 10 years ago and said I own a cloud infrastructure provider, that's about the end of the conversation.
Yeah.
There's if I say I'm involved in AI, every single person has something they want to talk about as they're
Yeah.
trying to get their arms around it. And so, like for my consulting practice before I rejoined Expedient, the prior to ChatGPT in like November of 2022, AI was mostly the domain of the PhD data
Right.
scientist. Let's build a model. As soon as that happened, as soon as humans realized, and humans being CEOs and all up and down organizations, and my mom, as soon as you realize that somehow there's some entity that you can interact with, like we're interacting, and start to have a conversation, it's just mind blown.
Right.
And that didn't happen overnight. There was a whole set of stair steps, but that's when that connection was made to the general population. And so my consulting business went from very kind of like data science type stuff to CEOs calling saying I want AI inside my company responsibly, so the whole kind of dialogue flipped, and that's pretty cool. So now everybody understands there's possibilities, but you're still at like, okay, great. Well, what steps can I take to kind of realize those possibilities? It's daunting. And not only that, not only the steps that you could technologically take, but like the more kind of existential or philosophic issues of what's this relationship with this thing that's out there? What is this thing that we're dealing with? And that's like um almost like you're negotiating a relationship that's going to be evolving over time, and people are I think there's just a lot of uncertainty maybe, but potentially fear. There's like it's like how many times has technology created emotional issues? Like never.
Yeah.
It's solving problems, it's correlating information, but it's very much a more binary system. Now we have to deal with emotions, and we're kind of grasping with that. And that's a spot technology that I'm unaware has ever been into, maybe since electricity, where you're like you have this powerful physical system that can change everything in the world, and it's like, oh, we're going to go into an industrial era with electricity, but I wasn't around for that one, so I
I'm
don't
not saying
know.
I was or not. I'll push back a little bit on that because I think it's happened in two areas. One, of course, is the Industrial Revolution, where someone who was making their living out of working with beasts of labor or being that beast of labor,
Hmm.
and then suddenly they were introduced into something that was going to be replacing them. Now, it's a very different because it's not an intellectual replacement, but it's a physical replacement. And all kidding aside, it did happen before my day.
Mm.
But I think that type of thing happened. And then to a lesser degree, a much lesser degree, when early robotics started getting into the shop floors. because you had a lot of, and there was that whole, you're not getting the craftsmanship from a human being. No, you're also not getting the error rate from a
Right.
human being. But now we have that same kind of replacement, but on a technology level. So the person that is doing intellectual work, however you want to define it, it can be replaced. But I love the use of the word relationship. I never thought of it from that standpoint, but you could make the case that again, 'cause I look at these again, last three, the big data, the cybersecurity, and AI, as very similar in terms of what type of revolutions they're creating, and relationships figure in all three of those. Relationship of data. How are we relating to data? It used to be something that just drove us to very, very simple decisions, whether they be strategic or tactical. Now data is driving our, the whole attention gambit, all that kind of fun stuff, and cybersecurity to a certain degree, the same thing.
Well, think about this too, and so I completely agree with the industrial revolution. Never didn't think really much about the robotics, but whenever you have some sea change happening, for me, I go look back at what has happened in the past, try and read, and like, well, how did we deal with that in the past? There's actually a great book. I know this is not a book club, but it's called Pandemonium. And I got turned on to it because Sam Altman, the founder of OpenAI, said that he had read it. And what it is it's a collection of like writings, short pieces of folks who were affected by the Industrial Revolution. And this is like
Oh,
reports
wow.
of how like people were protesting and burning plants down, and how essentially people were trying to grasp with this displacement from like more of a feudal and agrarian world to an
Yeah.
industrial world. And whole industries that existed before are no longer. It's phenomenal. And so it's a book, 500 pages, but it's a bunch of like 2-page things of
Yeah.
technologists. Awesome, relatively hard to find, but you can find maybe used on Amazon. But like when I look at it, it's like those people were trying to deal with the same type of situation that we have now. And I think the piece that is it. So I agree with your other point about this is an information. So to the capital T, lowercase I, capital I, lowercase t. This is a super capital I, but it's and folks are all excited about the AIs and the models and these brains, but it's really like, well, okay, great, you have a PhD, but what are they producing?
Right.
And so what value are we extracting? And so the real story mostly is an I, is how do we couple these brains with this information? And the use case is how do we make it super easy for folks like you or me, or a subject matter expert in an organization, not a technologist, to have a conversation with data, so that when we talk about relationships, and I guess we'll go a little geeky here because there's some geeks that will be listening to this. If you look at RDBMS or different types of data systems, we're kind of predefining the relationships. Oh, let's pull these columns and then combine it this way, and craft a report for management that helps us gain insight into our business. The kind of like the big value in terms of AI is we don't necessarily have to predefine those relationships. We don't know how this data is linked to this data. AI is great at pulling the needle out of the haystack on that.
Right.
So the end goal becomes, how do we as technologists make it super easy for people who need to understand things about the data can talk to that data without the need to kind of play the telephone game of intermediaries. And so, hey, who knows what questions the CEO needs to ask about the business, but why do those questions need to go through 8 layers of folks? And then the report comes back up through the 8 layers. And we find out, oh, that's not exactly what I want. With AI, you can have that dialogue and be like, hey, I want this. And here's the data that comes back. And they'd be like, I didn't really want it that way. Can you redo it this way? And it becomes a conversation. And eventually you triangulate your answer. And we're not there yet, but that's
Right.
kind of the job, is building those pipelines so that we can talk to it and get answers. But yeah, for certainly the enterprise side, it's like you have this mountain of data in your business that there's no way you could possibly stay on top of. But all of the answers of what you need to do strategically to better your customer experience, to better your product ads, strategic differential competitive advantage, it's all sitting there. You just don't know how to access it. So as techs, our job is to plumb it. So we'll build the plumbing between those and then essentially give folks a heavy tool that they can use to ask those pressing questions. So that's a big kind of, and like we're not talking this is a 1 year program. I mean, I look at this is a 20-year
Oh,
kind
absolutely.
of, maybe more, but 20 years to really start extracting the value where we can and all that.
Well, and when you think about, for example, where we were in terms of databases and what we could do 20 years ago from a database standpoint, and or even some of us can go back a lot further back, where what we did was we basically copied what humans did. We did general ledger, we did receivables, we did payables, assets, inventory, whatever. And all we were doing was really recording the transactions and then spitting them out in a more cost efficient, but it was the same process. It was the same data. It was the same thing. And then slowly but surely, we started coming up with different ways to present the data, different ways to allow an informed user or someone like me to essentially say, hey, what should I order next month? Hey, what should we do about this quality control? And if you look at that, the growth of from where we started to where we ended up over a 20-year period is amazing. But then take that and then apply that here, where here we're at kind of year one or maybe year two. Where are we going to go? And that's going to be interesting, from a fascinating standpoint. But it also helps kind of what I think you were hinting at is let's set up our initial expectations.
Yeah.
Because this can't just answer questions, period, and trust the answers, right?
Oh yeah, definitely. There's so I guess we've been trained with computers that if they're accessing a database or some sort of a system or you're programming, that it's a very deterministic and predictable system. Hey, if the
Right.
answer is in the database and you return it back, okay, we can now continue on with further reasoning off of that. As soon as it runs through some sort of an AI model, it's suspect. Like
Right.
there's just the information comes back. If you ask it about things like we get, like I think one of the internal guys last week asked about a history of our company. That's very niche information, and the AI feels like it has to answer. And so it just goes off on tangents. And he sent it to me in like a Teams chat. He's like, how accurate is this? Like, not at all. Like, it got a few pieces, but like, if you said this is the history of the company, and so like, it's kind of like a lot of these models are generalists, and you take them if you're asking it a general knowledge question, like how something where there's a lot of evidence out there, like how do I jack my car up and change a tire in
Right.
general? Cool, got it. There's a million examples of how to do that. When you ask it a really niche piece of question, that's actually where the data part comes in. Because what a lot of folks are doing now, and what I was doing in consulting, is how do you ground the AI with specific niche knowledge relative to your business or whatever you're trying to figure out. And essentially, like a lot of the systems and models right now, model meaning like programming kind of paradigm, would be use the AI brain, but think about it as a generalist PhD, and then use your internal data as like your library. And so you go and make systems that pull the relevant reference material off the shelves, and there's technologies to do that, and present that to the AI as context so that it's like, hey, use your general reasoning brain, but like make sure to include the information in these library books, and then your answers become much more grounded and much more reliable. Still, you're not going to take that information, go send it out to a client or anything like that. You're going to kind of check it, but you get way closer to having actionable information than you would if you just said, just pull something off the shelf or use OpenAI to answer.
Are you fed up with reactive IT providers who take too long to respond, let problems fester, and nickel and dime you for every little thing? Say goodbye to those frustrations by choosing Simplex-IT, home of Amazon's best-selling author and BizTech Twist host Bob Coppage. As Northeast Ohio's friendly neighborhood MSP, Simplex-IT has been providing top-notch managed and co-managed IT services since 2007, supporting hundreds of clients locally and across the United States. With a managed service provider like Simplex-IT, you'll benefit from proactive maintenance, 24/7 monitoring, and streamlined technology that will help you grow your business. Visit simplex-it.com for more information and to start experiencing stress-free IT today.
So it sounds like there's kind of two guardrails here from this aspect. Guardrail number one is you need someone, when it is very specific, specialized information, you need to have someone who is specialized enough on that topic who can tell when there's, smoke being blown somewhere,
Yep.
And on the other hand, when you're going too general, that somebody needs to be able to take a look at the results and say it's applicable to the question being asked. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, and I think so we'll just say maybe we'll use the term guardrails in terms of AI as wrappers around the brain that make it more effective. So
Right.
you got this, then all AI is, not to minimize, is giant computer program. It's a 48 gig computer program that runs and answers questions. So like grounding information is one piece of it, but like other guardrails that come up, like I think last week or whatever, Gemini, so Google's AI, had a huge issue because people were asking it a nuanced question like create an image of the founders of the United States. And Gemini had put guardrails on it around like race and bias and all kinds of stuff. So it was coming up with examples of the founders which weren't historically accurate because it was swapping in folks of races that the founders all happened to be of a certain, type. And so it was interesting that those were guardrails that were built around the AI to try and essentially remove bias and all that type of stuff. But you have to be extremely careful with those things because on a general sense, if you said, give me a picture of a computer programmer, without some tweaking, it might always give you a picture of a white male, but that's not what every computer programmer is. But in the case of the founders of the United States, it's a very specific set of information, and you want the truth to come back out of the system. And so how do you navigate that is a huge issue right now that people are dealing with, because going too far on one side muddles the answer, going too far on the other side, and you don't necessarily have a wide enough representation of humans, which it's a cool area to explore. There's a lot of consequences right now.
Oh, absolutely. And you're basically trying to go after, micro tool management with a sledgehammer.
Yeah.
Because even if you just take just that statement, the founders of the United States, well, are these people who found North America, the people who made the transition across the Siberian? Are these the people who, when you say found, we talk about United States or North America or whatever, and there are contextual ways to interpret it that are going to be different. I get back to, when someone tells me that humor is not logical. Yeah, it's the most logical thing on the planet. You start with a statement that's based on this foundation and this premise and this framework, and then you change the framework for the punchline. But it still makes a logical sense, but not in the way the person originally expected it. And computers, they're not there yet. And so the interpretation of the data, the interpretation of the query, the interpretation of the desired results are still going to be, not only are they going to be driven by, like we said at the beginning, anyone who understands everything is lying to you on AI. And I would include the developers to a certain degree, because they don't know the beast that they've created, as certainly better than I do. So the bias and nuances, that's not going to go away anytime soon.
Yeah, and I don't want to drill too far into the topic, but you brought up that the creators of these systems don't really understand it, and that's actually true. where they know that the system, you can give it inputs and it generally has these types of outputs, which are very valuable. But how this gigantic neural network actually works and processes, they know less than we know about our brain on it. And it's actually interesting when you look at like neurology and like neurosurgery. It's pretty Stone Age in terms of what we know about a highly complex system. And so if us as not giant model builders and we're grasping it more, I am from an engineering perspective, not as much from a science perspective. If you go upstream and you say the smartest people we have working on AI can't predict exactly how the system works or why it works a certain way, that's a little disconcerting, I would say, especially if you're going to be like, well, we're going to use this in a business. We're going to use this to make decisions in life. And we're like, it's kind of a black box type situation. We can explain the technology, but not why. And that's interesting for sure.
It is. And yet you're already, since these decisions are being made, they're either being made in a by an aggregate decision of many people who are not, all talking or working together, or they're made by people in some kind of organizational structure. You get back into the autonomous cars. Well, we already have humans driving, and we know they have an error rate, and we know they have damages and fatalities and all that kind of fun stuff. The problem, though, is that with an AI model, if there's a mistake to be made, it may be made many times, with one particular failing, but that one particular failing could be time sensitive or specific circumstance that happens all over the place. Whereas if one driver makes a mistake, it's only limited to that one particular area, that one particular incident.
Yeah. And I think the computer part, or what's the AI part, is under a little bit more of a microscope. Like if you compare, like for instance, your self-driving car part, the accident rates, because we think, again, we're trying to figure out this relationship with this entity or entities or whatever it is. And, we're expecting computers to behave in deterministic systems. So like you go up in a plane, there's actually like 3 different autopilots that control it. Like the pilots don't even really need to do takeoff and landing or flying at all. Like it's controlled. There's 3 separate systems that run the plane, but they're deterministic. There's 0% chance that you want that thing kind of making decisions on the fly. And so that's the computer systems we're expecting. And so now we're saying, hey, we have a system that can interpret visual information and try and make its best guess. Because like at the end of the day, these are probabilistic systems. Like at the core, the LLM is a probability generator. And it's like, are we cool with the machine making probability determinations about, in the case of a car, human life? And we're not okay with that relationship. So if there's one accident in a Tesla in a year that kills a pedestrian or something, and that's way less than our human one, it's still like verboten. Like we have a serious issue with it. Mathematically, we shouldn't, but like we look at humans as humans, not as a math equation. And we should not look at them as math equations. But so it's an interesting like conundrum to kind of untie on that one.
Yeah, and it's one of those where we're not, how do I want to put this? And I include myself here. We're not the most knowledgeable in terms of probabilities.
Yeah.
And in terms of, if something works, we assume that it worked because everything was perfect, not that it failed 99 other times. We just happened to see the one time where it succeeded.
Right.
And I get back to one of my favorite fictional characters, Sherlock Holmes, with deductive reasoning. Yeah, but he could have been wrong a lot. Every time he would stand up and he'd go, oh, well, this, because a British royalty would never do this or would never do. Well, yeah, they might. They might do this. It might be another explanation, but there never was, because he was always right. And boy, we love it when something is guaranteed to be right.
Well, but the nice, like, I love the Sherlock Holmes analogy. I never really thought about it that way. So it's a series of deductions that are probabilities, but eventually you get to like the commonality. And I guess maybe one of the parts is like Sherlock Holmes is a human. So if he's wrong, we know who to
Does his throat to choke? Yeah.
you know who to choke on it and who to address it. With the machine, you're like, well, if it's making probabilistic deductions, who are we, and then we could kind of foray into, like, I was just out at a conference that was for agents slash trusted advisors for telecom. And one of the first questions, not even like what's the AI technology and all that is, how safe are our jobs? Like, these are sales folks that are like, well, wait, how's this going to impact me or my clients? And you kind of go back to like, and this is actually what came up during that conversation. It's like first broach conversation is, are you developing strong emotional relationships? And if you have strong emotional relationships, why does somebody buy technology from Bob? Or why do they could do things themselves.
Right.
Why do they buy it from you? Because they can trust you. You've built an emotional bond. You've built a long-term relationship, and they're willing to pay a premium to essentially have someone that they can call up and say, hey, problems happen. Bob, can you help me out solve that? Who are you going to call Hal 9000 and say, hey, Hal's just going to open the pod bay door? It's like,
All right. I got to call you on that one. He will not open the pod bay doors.
oh, he won't open.
If he would have opened them,
Oh,
it would have
because
been
it would have
different.
been, I'm sorry, Dave, I can do that.
That's interesting because that brings up another point is that in this day and age, we're sitting back and we're going, we want to have that personal relationship. We want to have it. So as a consumer of product or goods or services, I want to make sure that someone is giving me that specialized service, so on and so forth. As a provider of those services, I'm going, ooh, I can use AI to automate everything.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting. So from a consumer standpoint of AI, there may be a resistance in some people, similar to what we have now. I don't want to talk to an automation. I want to talk to a human being.
Yeah,
And some of that's because of AI is very imperfect at this point, especially on the chat box.
yeah. Well, it was actually super. That's an interesting area to go down. And I think we should probably stay on this. Uh, what jobs or functions could be replaced, what wouldn't be replaced, and why, those particular things. But at this conference this AI summit last week, a lot of what these folks sell are like uh, uh, telephony systems, so like call center systems, like big portion of their revenue is related to these things. So a natural point for AI right now is automating some of that. And then from a consumer perspective, if I'm calling in and I'm talking to an AI, and that's where it's going, because like a lot of folks are starting to replace.
Right.
If I'm trying to get help to solve a problem, with like, hey, rebooking my flight or whatever, and I have to wait on hold 30 minutes or something, and then get to the wrong person who then sends me to the wrong department, or I talk to an AI and I get my problem solved extremely quickly, I have no problem talking to an AI because it gets me solved. But there's an even more nuanced one. They did a live demo where there was like a call center in the Philippines, and they were talking to the person in the call center in the Philippines. And hey, if you outsource your call center to a different country, these aren't native English speakers. They natively speak a different language, different kind of intonations and all of that stuff. They turned on AI on the call. It was indistinguishable from a Southern California person.
Right.
And so think about, like, folks have these resistances like, oh, hey, I'm calling a call center in India. It's hard to understand. They're not getting my thing. It immediately, flip a button, sounds like they're in Southern California. And that's the live kind of changing the way the speaking happens. I'm like, holy cow. So even if it's a human call center, you've immediately changed the relationship to be like, I'm starting off on a positive note, and we're going to work through. And it's so I found that absolutely amazing. And I always like it when people do live demos because that means it must actually work.
Yeah. And until it doesn't during the live
Until
demo.
it doesn't, but man, they were sweating for sure to
Yeah,
make
no,
sure
no
that
doubt.
that thing worked.
So let's use that analogy because there's been a couple of instances over the past quarter century or so, or even longer, like ATMs. No one's going to use an ATM. They want to use a teller. They want to talk to a human being.
Mhm.
And yet we used ATMs. We used them all over the place. And actually people said between ATMs and then online banking, we're going to get rid of the bank teller job. Bank teller job is going to be absolutely useless. But for the first 10, 15 years of that sort of stuff around the turn of the century, the number of tellers actually increased because banks found more things for them to do as far as providing goods and customer services to the clients, as well as, banks spread all over the place. Um, but it's one where you have a resistance from old farts like, oh, who would be old here? Oh, that would be me. Who are still going to be, wait a minute, I can tell that's a computer. I'm not going to talk to a computer. I'm going to insist on waiting.
Yeah.
And to that person, because there's such a difference between the consumer experience and the seller experience for technologies like this. Because the seller experience, we just want to sell more and we want to spend more during that process. And we can talk about the relationship, we can talk about all the other stuff, and the customer experience and user experience. Um, but then on the customer, the user side, some people, we want to have a positive experience. And other people, I just want the freaking thing to work quickly and efficiently and get me off this call as quick as humanly possible.
Yeah, and give people the options. So it's like, hey, if there's an
Yep.
option that this one's an AI automated thing, or you can talk to a human, just give people the options. But the human part is specific in terms of its positives and negatives. And
Right.
I'd say maybe the cut point between the two is whether it's a transactional relationship. So like I need X done. I'm talking to this person to get X done. It's very kind of cookie cutter in terms
Right.
of what's trying to happen. And the situations where we want someone to understand us. Like in the great salespeople that I know, when I buy something from them, I feel like they've invested themselves in understanding what
Sure.
I'm trying to do, who I am, what I'm motivated by, and I don't see the machine ever doing that. Now, if you call in to change your flight, like their job is not to understand me and the pains that I'm having and what airport I'm stranded in or whatever. They need to get X, Y, and Z done, and their metrics are maximum, calls per hour, all that kind of
Right.
stuff. But and so I look at the part that AI is, I don't know if it's ever going to be able to do, but it's that empathy kind of aspect where I feel like Bob's been a partner of mine for 20 years, and he has seen all the different grades and things that we do. He might be using AI to do that, but the controller, is understanding what I'm trying to do and how you can help me get there. And I don't think that type of system. So I look at sales as kind of impervious, as sales on a more complex thing.
Relational sales.
Yeah, you got
Yeah.
it. Sales on a widget from Amazon. Yeah, that'll all be completely automated and disintermediated. Not that other type.
Yeah. And I think that, when we were talking earlier about that 20-year spread, I think most people don't realize how far we are from that type of thing.
Yeah.
And I don't think so again, someone who can be empathic, uh, and be based on that relationship, which, counts me out completely. But I think those are the people who, if they double down, I think they're actually going to end up being in a better spot because the lack of that they're going to get out of all of the AI tools that are selling are going to make the salespeople who are very relationship based look that much better to people who are looking for that type of thing.
Yeah, so as we kind of map out 20 years, and anytime somebody tries to do that with AI, you got to immediately completely discount whatever they're saying. So discount everything I'm going to say from here out
Yeah.
of
So
money.
anyone who's watching this right now, you can, what, about 3 minutes? You can fast
Yeah,
forward
just
about 3 minutes.
skip the next minute or so.
Okay. Yeah.
But it
Okay.
seems like everybody, at least on the enterprise business side, is talking about how do I save money? How do I increase efficiencies? So maybe I don't need to hire additional people or have less people in my call center. That's like the short-term game.
Right.
And I get it, make the profits of the company higher, like all that type of stuff, potentially improve customer service, like less, well, but that's where people are thinking now. But that's not the actual kind of true end state. The true end state, I think, is okay, if I can do this and this more efficiently, why can't I then either keep the same number of people or hire more to grow faster?
Right.
And so, like, I think that's like people are right, just trying to get some use and hey, if you can show that you've invested 10 grand in this technology and you saved 100 grand, it's a really easy proof point in terms of value. There's a dollar, you can put a dollar amount on it, but then it's like, okay, how do I use this to accelerate my business? And I don't know that this is any different than it's ever been in the past, but I like being in businesses that are trying to grow as fast as possible, as opposed to businesses that are thinking, how do I trim costs as much as possible? And a lot of times they say businesses are either run by accountants or salespeople, and the salespeople get too out of line and the accountants come in and clean everything up. And then the accountants, they pay attention to the P&L, but that's not what makes a business great. P&Ls don't make businesses great.
Right.
They show profits, but the strategy and the customer relations, what sales is good at, is, to me, the long-term driver of a business. And so it always ends up being kind of like a whipsaw. But if you look at it now, there's going to be some pain, just like industrial revolution pain.
Yeah.
While we figure out where those efficiencies are, and the first things will be like efficiencies until we can normalize them, figure out, okay, now that we understand this technology a bit, how do we grow faster? And I think most companies will end up coming to that point because that's how they're marked against competitors in their industry. It's how do we do more? And it's not just do more with less. How do we do more with more? And it'll get there, but there will be, I don't know how long that window is, 5 years or something. There'll be a time where it's there's a lot of pain. It won't stop the technology evolving, but it will be displacing, I think.
Yeah. And that's true. Again, every revolution there's been as far as IT and computers and all that kind of fun stuff goes. So I think that's going to be interesting. And that kind of process, whether you call it do more with less. I mean, I've always, and I've actually called it Bob's Law, that 5% of what IT people do becomes commoditized every year because it's being automated, it's being added to tools, it's being, commoditized, however you want to call it.
Right.
But then there's also the corollary is because of advances on technology, there's 5% of additional value add things we can do, whether it be us as the IT professionals or as our clients. There's 5 high level, high value things that we could do that we couldn't do before because of advances in technology. And half of the game is if you're doing the same thing today that you were doing 2 years ago, you've fallen behind.
Well,
Whether it be from an organizational standpoint or from an individual professional standpoint or anything. And AI is absolutely gonna double down on that for the next few years.
Yeah, think about it this way too. So I used to have a marketing technology company that did it tracked when you were going to rent an apartment, the phone number that you called to do the leasing agent was like a hosted number, so they could track back. This is my marketing spend, and here's why. Here's what's driving this outcome that we want. Anyway, so at that point, there was a nice little like architecture document of all the different marketing technology providers. So like in 2008, there's about 50 people on it. I just checked it like a week ago, 7,500 different marketing technology providers. AI is probably already at 7,500 in terms of applications and Copilot and this and that and all these different things. So what do folks need from you and from us, whether it's IT or ITAI or whatever? You need curators. The end company does not have the ability, unless they're sitting on top of it the whole time, to know like what's good, what's not. Even if from big brands, like should I be doing something with Microsoft, or what about Google? Or I just heard this news report come out. Like, so there's going to be there's a need, in fact, an accelerating need of somebody to curate that. It's like, we know that this stuff fits your needs. Why do we know that? Because we know you. Like,
Right.
we've invested the time to understand you, and we know how to plug you into the right things. That will accelerate. So the value on top of curating will just continue to increase for IT in general.
Yeah, and that's true so often where you need that Sherpa, you need that someone who's going to guide you through the hero journey, for lack of a better word, to go through that process. So cool. So why would folks want to reach out to you, and how would they go about doing that?
Oh, thanks. Yeah. So there's a couple kind of things going on now in terms of AI, and it's like, okay, so we just talked
Wait,
about
what? There's
a
things
lot
going
of
on?
you need to edit that part out.
Never.
Just what it, yeah, let me keep me like feature that part as the dumb statement. But it's kind of like we've been talking about very broad aspects, and people talk this cocktail party that people talk about these broad
Right.
aspects. Like, okay, where do you start? And so the way that we look at it, and I mean other folks look at it too, is how do you get the most powerful AI in the hands of every employee at your company responsibly and cost effectively? So like, you could look at, hey, well, we'll give everybody Copilot for $30 a month. Well, that might be a powerful AI, but it's, for a 100-person company, that's a lot of money to invest going forward. You need something relatively economical to get your hands around it. But the reality is, the people that will drive, and you mentioned this earlier, we'll call it use cases of AI, the things that start to save the efficiencies, where they're not the smartest technologists. The smartest technologist in a medium-sized business doesn't understand the business. Like, they just don't. They're not domain experts in technical support and sales and marketing and all that type of stuff. So how do you get that tool out to as wide a group in the organization as possible, economically, responsibly, all that? We can help people do that. We have like a kind of a crawl, walk, run thing where we set people up with an AI gateway, and we just give them chat for free. So a Copilot like chat for free on top of it, because we want to get that tool in the hands of everybody. So like, for us, if you're a medium-sized enterprise, maybe 50 employees or more, and you want to figure out a way to get chat securely and with audit logs and PII redaction, all that kind of stuff you need to pass governance, and you want to do that as your baby step, we can help along that. We have the ability to help with much more sophisticated things in the walk and the run phase. The reality is nobody's there. They just, and so they want to, a lot of folks that we talk to, they want to talk about the run phase. Hey, we're going to do this AI project and it's going to transform our business. You don't know enough about AI yet, about what it can and can't do, and what the bias, all the stuff that we talked about. You really need to get that tool in the hands of the smartest people in your organization, and then kind of iterate it from there. Even though that seems simplistic, it's kind of the path. And so if folks want to go down that path, we can help them out for sure.
Cool. And how do they get in touch with you if that's of interest?
Oh, yeah, sure. My email is just bradley.reynolds@Expedient, expedient.com. And then you could just check out the Expedient website as well. And there'll be a bunch of AI stuff on there too.
And I can attest that Brad does reply to his emails, because I sent him an email and he replied.
Well, you're important though.
Yeah, that was why your reply was, "You're not that Bob Coppage, are you?" No, this is cool, because again, what I didn't want to do is I didn't want to go, revisit the whole AI is changing everything. It's going to be
Sure.
this, it's going to be that, because there's so much nuanced stuff going on that you want to make sure we don't go down the technology rabbit hole, but we also don't want to make sure we're doing this Pollyanna, either everything's going to be absolutely wonderful, or the gods of chaos are going to descend. And I think you worked that through great, so I appreciate that.
Well, thanks, Bob. I appreciate your time. It's refreshing, because I've done a bunch of podcasts, to have a dialogue as opposed to having here's a question, go on a 3-minute thing, and then I'll ask you another question. So
Yeah,
I really appreciate that, and your insights are spot on, as kind of you're grasping with it as in the same way that we are.
Cool. Well, to those of you who joined us, I want to thank Brad again, and want to reiterate that the AR overlords are expecting you to click on thumbs up. They are also expecting you to subscribe, to comment, to share, to do all those things that one does with a podcast. And as always, thanks everybody, and thanks Brad, and catch you all later.
Thanks, Bob.
Thanks.